assist running the book launch and bring her perspective to this interesting book. And Anjun is, a modern-age Indian novelist and a poetess. She's written Lunatic in My Head, among other novels. And what we're going to do today, because unfortunately Manoj had a family emergency, his dad is not very well, is we're going to have a very interesting kind of book launch. We're going to have a book launch with 3 authors talking a little bit about the book and the author not being here. And I think that's actually going to be quite an interesting experience, because now the author's not here to defend or portray his book. It's actually a bunch of other authors who've engaged with the work to kind of showcase what's exciting about the book and why you should have a look at it. So to start, we're going to have Paro read an excerpt of the book. Just so you know, we're going to have some visuals of the wonderful illustrations by Yuko Shimizu in the backdrop. So have a look at those illustrations while Paro is going to read. And Paro is going to read the story called Enjoy Coca-Cola. So I'm going to leave it to Paro to read for a couple of minutes, and then we're going to discuss some important lenses of the book together with this wonderful panel over here. So thank you very much for being here, and I'll welcome Paro on the stage.
Okay. So the poem that I'm going to read, it's not actually a poem, it's a very interesting format of prose, but it looks like poetry. And the one I'm reading is called Enjoy Coca-Cola. The war was over. The king was dead. The Maoists in Nepal had assumed power. The kingdom had become a republic. History had been erased to be written all over again in Delhi. Maya had just arrived, an 18-year-old from Nepal who fled from her village ravaged by rebels. She had been one too, long ago, a foot soldier who knew everything about poverty and nothing about the Communist Manifesto or Mr. Mao Zedong. They had embraced the red of the revolution, a colorful anecdote to the dull gray of deprivation. The distance from the railway station to the house where she finally got employed had not been easy. She had to traffic herself. Sex for food, sex for shelter, sex for survival. It was a miracle she had not ended in the red light district of a B-grade town. Her employer was a Punjabi man, a widower and a dhaba owner, with a daughter of 8. It wasn't easy for Maya there too, but the miseries were bearable within the walls and not out on the streets. It was still a sanctuary with just one man to ravage her, and occasionally his friends. Bearable, bearable, bearable. Oh God, so bearable. Because it came with perks, sleep, food, shelter, the bearable asylum of domesticity. There were things, some things, piling up in her head like prosaic everyday objects in a typical home. A list of revolution and its aftermath. She'd think all of this and heave or try to, constantly feeling stifled with no sign of second wind or a wee bit of silence, rolling in her bed, rolling in her head, tossing, turning and trying very hard to undo things, to rewrite history, until the darkness in her room, the fraught silence, would be broken by a hiss. Ah, Coca-Cola.
Thank you so much, Paro. I love the way that prose story ended. So Manoj, his background is as an advertising consultant, and this is his first book. And one of the things he really spoke to me about, that he was passionate about, was form, and how form interacts with the material that's being discussed. And in particular, given both of your backgrounds in modern India, I want to talk about how does the form, the unique format of these stories, interact with our understanding of modernized India. Because it's not really just modernization, it's modernized India, and we get glimpses of it with the story. So, Anuj, do you want to start, and then Paro?
Yeah, I came to the book without knowing very much about Manoj at all, but it was interesting to read the introduction to the author, which says that he's edited an anthology of stories called Tales on Tweet, featuring very well-known names like Salman Rushdie and Margaret Atwood. And the form of the stories itself is very much derived, I think, from the short form, flash fiction, Twitter. So no story is more than a couple of pages, and each paragraph, if you could call it that, or stanza, is just about the length of a tweet or a little longer. So the novelty of the book is certainly in this very condensed form. And that is sort of set up against these tales that seem to me very dystopian in some ways. There's a lot of envoy, there are characters adrift in the modern Indian metropolis. There's a lot of immigrants from, particularly from Darjeeling, Nepal. So there is a sense of emptiness in the lives of these characters, and one wonders if, dare I say, the hollowness of their lives is echoing the sort of superficiality of Twitter. I don't know. But that did occur to me, that is there a correspondence here between the form and the subject matter?
Absolutely, and I think what's so interesting is the piece you brought out about Twitter, because it's almost like the speaker in the story is trying to get across just the sheer desperation of these characters in a very in a way that they're actually hindered by the form, and that's what creates the tension. Paro, I want you to kind of bounce off that, but also, given your background kind of with looking at the lens of children and young women, how does this form of this particular story that you read sort of interact with the story of this woman, young woman coming in?
Yeah, I think the word adrift is also the word which came to me because of the way that it's written. You don't, unlike in a conventional work of prose, where you can grasp something, there's something for you to sink your teeth into, here there isn't. Here you're sort of, the reader starts out on a journey and is left adrift. And there's a lot of white, empty spaces on the pages, which kind of reflects the voicelessness of the characters. And I think they don't really have that solid voice. They don't have a narrative to fill up pages because their own lives are so bereft and adrift, and so it really is narratives of voicelessness to me.
That's really interesting. So working off of the piece around voicelessness, in the books, in the different stories, a lot of the characters that are being talked about are women. And in most cases, the women are, bereft, but for different reasons. You have a character who is a professor and a, lauded author, and you have this character in this story, and you have another character who's sort of an object of sexual desire. So how do you see, Paro, how do you see that interaction between the speaker, who's, seems to be a male, older male in times, and the interaction of all these kind of different women who are in different sort of levels and status, but at the same time are addressed in a similar way? Can you speak to that a bit?
I think a lot of it is women in distress or women who, again, don't have voice. I don't know a better way to say this, but very much from male gaze. So you're looking at someone else's helplessness, but through a gaze which is completely different. And in this morning session, as well as in a session I had yesterday, there's been a lot of talk about can you write about someone who you're not? Can you write about a wound which is not on your body and heart? And I think very much in this, these are someone else's wounds being viewed by a person who's much more whole, maybe. Does it then take away the license for him to speak on these women? No, I don't believe that. I think if he feels and if he empathizes, then he should be able to give however many words that he thinks he can to those women.
Anjan, what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think all of literature, all of prose fiction, certainly, boils down to two things: narrative and interiority, right? And curiously, both things are missing here. Narrative is missing because it is so, the stories are so short and so truncated in a way. So it's not just that they're short, they also seem like they're just glimpses of something, and then the story ends before you can even delve into the lives of those characters. And like Paro said, there is no interiority. These are characters who the author is looking at. The characters are not speaking for themselves. There is a first-person narrator in some of the stories, but then in those stories you feel that narrator is closer to the character of the author. The first-person character is never the woman who ends up in a brothel. It's never, a working-class character, again, who's washing dishes in a dhaba and ends up a gigolo and then has to change his gender. None of these very desperate characters. The I character is usually a more disenchanted middle-class character with middle-class problems. So I think his decision to take away both interiority and narrative is interesting, but also dangerous, because it's a double-edged thing. He is trying to portray a world where maybe our lives don't have enough heft to be told over the course of a novel anymore. Maybe our lives don't have enough material or richness to lend themselves to novel-length narratives or to even lend themselves to short story-length narratives. Maybe our lives have been reduced to the length of a bunch of tweets. Maybe we're all just a bunch of tweets now. So there is a genuine thought there. What if these are the lives? And he is describing different kinds of fairly well-to-do middle-class protagonists who work in sort of dead-end jobs and seem very disenchanted with their lives, may have certain kinds of sexual repression or longings, mental health issues. And so it is representative in some ways, but it also feels like it may be his comment on a particular moment in the Indian middle class. But like I said, it's dangerous because it's double-edged. If our lives are disenchanted, should our fiction then be equally disenchanting, or can it reveal something about our lives that makes those lives less boring?
Yeah, I think that's... I loved what you said, is our lives a bunch of tweets or not? And I think what you're speaking to there is redemption. Is there a moment that is redemptive? So if we're living in a dystopian world, which a lot of us will argue we are, what is that connection? And I think you're totally right. The book is sort of playing with the fact that even when you are connected, you're not actually connected through the prose and the way it does that. I guess my question is, given that the speaker is sort of upper middle class and is not living the life of the things he's observing, is there a value to that when we think about where we are in the cultural moment? And I don't just mean Me Too, but in terms of even the class divide that we do have, is there value in kind of, that double-edged sword of almost doing it intentionally and having that second layer of observing the speaker doing such things? Is there a way in which it helps us understand ourselves? Paro?
Well, to me, it's more than Twitter, it's almost like reading skeletons.
Like that.
Yeah, it's because it isn't Twitter-like in the sense that there is not a whimsy, but a floatingness to it. And certainly Twitter, or definitely Facebook, is always just the positives of your life, and these are certainly not that. Nobody is writing about these characters, these people, these subjects on Facebook. All you're saying is the beautiful places you went, the wonderful food you ate. These are not that. So I think it's more like reading skeletons, horrible as that sounds, and it kind of leaves the reader to build and weave the bodies on those skeletons, and maybe just like an idea has been planted and left. It's just the seed. In a novel, you plant the seed, you grow the seed into the plant, into a tree, until maybe the tree ends, and then you've got this big long saga. Here you're just given the seed and left, and then you do the rest. So I think it requires actually, although you can read the book really quickly, I don't think it's an easy read.
Right, yeah.
You have to work long afterwards if you're going to build those bodies on the skeletons.
I like reading skeletons, so that's a big pitch for the book. I mean, there's something very morbid but exciting about that. I guess, Anja, one of the things that Manoj does, in addition to the kind of short form narratives, is around making literature accessible. That's another part of what he does. So when you look at these stories, in many ways, this story, for example, is telling the story of someone being taken, or going away from their home and finding, the opposite of an oasis in the city. How do you think this text kind of works through, kind of the accessibility piece, given the speaker is kind of upper class and viewing? How does that make this accessible, or how's the interaction of accessibility and the speaker in these pieces?
I think when we write about characters who don't belong to our class, we tend to focus on what makes them different from us rather than what we have in common with them. So sometimes his stories about characters who are drifting into the metropolis and sort of completely oppressed by it and then shunted to the margins of it, feel like just reports on the state of their existence. And you could just replace them. Maya, the character of the story, is just a placeholder, that name and that character for any such girl who comes
and the Coca-Cola almost comes at the end and becomes the main character.
Yeah, so the Coca-Cola in a way is, if not redemptive, at least some kind of a surprise. But I was just talking the other day with a friend who's also at the festival about this whole issue of class. How do we, as middle class people, go beyond our own experience? Because it would be terrible to assume that we can only write about people like ourselves. And I absolutely, in my own work, don't subscribe to that view. I am trying constantly to write about other kinds of people. And how do I do that? I'm not sure I always succeed. But there are interesting examples before us of people who have succeeded. And one writer I can think of is the Hindi novelist and short story writer Vinod Kumar Shukla, who writes about lower middle class lives in a way that is highly poetic, without being patronizing, without saying there is something inherently beautiful about poverty. No. But he is saying that there is a way of looking at dispossession without just making it a journalistic report on poverty. That there is a poetic, artistic way of recording, explaining, describing lives. And dispossession is always only one part of even a poor person's life. They still have language, they still have emotions, they still have dreams, right? In some ways, they are us. There is no such distinction that they become completely alien to us. So I think someone like Vinod Kumar Shukla is able to mine that poetic element where the world is dislocated, things are not always perfect. There is a sense of deprivation, but there is also, because of that, a way of looking at the world askance that becomes his aesthetic. So that is closer to me to a literary ideal than just writing a report on a person who's dispossessed. And I think Manoj sometimes is coming closer to that, but sometimes going very far from it.
Yeah, there's definitely a way in which he kind of drops in and out.
Yeah.
I guess I'll give Paro the last question around, you know, one thing that when I was reading this book, I said there's a flavor that, you know, and I referred to it earlier, is this flavor of Indian modernization, in the sense that, you know, Twitter, Facebook, and in the way in which it's referenced, it's not just that, oh, it's a globalization. There is globalization operating here, but there's an Indian way of personifying it. So if you had to personify this kind of character, which is, I guess, Indian, you know, the Indian modernization, or maybe even just a character of how, maybe modern India, if it's a character that's kind of a specter in this book, what would that character kind of emerge in this book, given the stories you've read?
Well, I don't know whether they can emerge out of the situations they are in, but I think to me it was interesting how in a modern India, in a modernized India, where of course he's sort of shining lights on various things that are wrong, and it's important to shine the light on those. It was, I mean, for instance, in this story, which I read from, the fact that there is that little bit of joy. We were talking about safe spaces, that in this home of this man who is a widower, uses her for his sexual gratification, and sometimes invites his friends to do so as well, she still has room to say, okay, but still this is a safe space, and still this is better than what the options were for me, and still finding that little sort of fizz of joy and safety almost in the opening of the Coke can or bottle.
Yeah.
And he's left it very, is she opening that bottle? Is she, or is somebody else opening it? I mean, it's not very stated. But I think that this thing of modernization and finding yourself in these, what does come across, though briefly and flickeringly, is that there is that little possibility of a fizz of joy.
Yes, and in a way, you know, just before the Coca-Cola can is opened, there's this line about how she has this determination to rewrite history.
Yeah.
And so what's interesting is the Coke can gets opened when she has this determination to rewrite history. So is the Coke, like you said, is that the moment of respite, or is it almost that she's forgotten what the main problem is for that brief moment, and she's been distracted by the red can of Coca-Cola? Yeah. So, you know, we're running out of time here, but I think what we wanted to do, and I thank you so much, Paro and Anjan, for a wonderful discussion. I feel like, you know, I'm really learning a lot as we just talk about a book, and more broadly how this book fits in a broader spectrum of Indian literature. You know, I think this book is interesting for you to have a look at because of what some of the topics we talked about in terms of form, in terms of really talking about, you know, the voiceless and what does it mean to look at the voiceless from another angle. And the piece around accessibility, because I think it's very intentional that you have, you know, 10 to 12 stories in a very compact format. So,
and the title, Legacy of Nothing.
And that's exactly how the Coke can works. Is your legacy the opening of a Coke can?
A Coke can. Yeah. And then the fizz is gone. And it's over. Gone. It's really, and it's done. Yeah.
So have a look at the book. I think it's at sale at the bookstore. Have a look at the wonderful illustrations. I don't think we could put it up, but there's just wonderful Japanese illustrations. And I'm sure, you know, Manoj, it's his debut. Would love to hear what you think. I'm sure he's online, on Twitter, and interacting with him that way would be great. And you can have a virtual launch for that. So thank you again.
Also the cover. I just wanted to...
yeah, let's do a little...
The cover also has this sort of distance that you're viewing something through binoculars from far away. and it has that quality as well.
Yeah, it's a wonderful interaction of text and the visual. So we're going to unveil this. So can I ask these wonderful ladies here to come and help unveil the cover? Because now we see it in big screen, so thank you for the reminder. And congratulations to Manoj in his absence. That's beautiful. Thank you everyone for attending.
So much, and congratulations, ma'am. National Arti. We just need 2 chairs, yes. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 12th Z Jaipur Literature Festival, Rajan Kilachand Mughal Tent. We're delighted to introduce Lives of Great Men. On the panel, we'll have Chiki, Frankie, and Dozin in conversation with Sandeep Roy. Please welcome them.